Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Jose Nomok, part of the Proxy dev team. Today we'll learn to connect Webflow with Cloudflare and use workers to create dynamic pages with server-side rendering, which is crucial when you want multiple pages from one template with changing URLs. Let's look at a project and see when this approach is necessary. I have a Webflow site with two pages, home and image. You'll notice markers indicating dynamic content. Wized can make this dynamic, but the URL stays the same. Let's check out this website. For the image page, Wized can change attributes, but you can't dynamically change the URL based on the image. Let's say I want the URL to be image1, image2, or image1000. It's not possible unless we use certain techniques like, for example, using Webflow's CMS, but even then there's a limit. So if we want to rank a page, like this one for instance, without making 1000 pages or using Webflow's CMS, this is where Cloudflare comes into play. I've already set up some configurations, but we'll learn how to connect it to use the reverse proxy we'll apply next. Let's explain what Cloudflare is and why it's called a reverse proxy, and how it works internally. What's the execution order when using these types of tools? I've prepared a small diagram to explain what a proxy is initially. Basically, a proxy is an external service that lets us avoid direct contact with the server we're accessing. For example, if I want to access google.com, I'd normally go straight to the URL through my browser. But if I have a proxy set up, either paid or free, when I make the request, the proxy intercepts it, just mine, and it connects directly to the server. So the server doesn't get my info during the request, but the proxy's info instead. This is used in many cases, like when a URL is blocked in a specific country, or we want to keep our IP address private somehow. But remember, the proxy will always know our info, so we must use a trusted service. So if I, as a user in this case, want to request a website and I have a proxy set up, first it goes to the proxy, then to the target website or websites, which could be A, B, C, a server, an image, or anything else. That's a regular proxy. Now, a reverse proxy is a bit different. The proxy no longer serves the user, it's at the server's disposal. So all user requests pass through the proxy as the first filter. Cloudflare helps with workers, letting you add logic to intercept requests before they reach the server. It can prevent DOS and OS attacks. We'll use it to create dynamic content from a single template. That's basically it. Next, we'll learn to set up this service with Webflow. To continue setup, we first need a purchase domain. We need access to the domain platform, its management, and of course Webflow and Cloudflare. First, let's go to project settings and then to the publishing section. Once there, go to the production area, add the custom domain and enter it manually. If I hadn't set up these two for noncodelis.com, I'd have to add the name manually, noncodelis. Once you add the domain, you should see these two sections as warning signs because it's not linked yet. It should show you the DNS records you'll need to point to. These records are used to link the domain, or rather, to redirect this domain to your project's internal website. Once we have those values, we need to go to, well, Namecheap in this case. I'm using this service. I'm already in my project settings, or rather my domain settings. In the advanced section, which I can't show as I've already set it up, there's a table similar to this. Let's look at the DNS records, for example. All right, when you check the records, you should see a table similar to this one. Once you see that table, the idea is to edit these values. It will give you certain values, including the SNAME. In fact, you only need to configure two, the synonym of the SSL web proxy and the one with W to redirect to the initial website. So you place those two values here. The same table will appear, you edit it, and once configured, it might take a few hours to publish globally. After it's set up, we can check the website to see if it redirects correctly. In this case, everything is already configured, which is why when I access the web without the .com or even just www, it will redirect me to the correct website. For the web domain linked to the Webflow project, we need to transfer domain administration to Cloudflare to use it as a reverse proxy. Let's start over and delete this to redo the test. We'll delete this domain. It's configured, but let's simulate with a new one. In this case, I'll use T. To avoid manually re-entering everything, it's recommended to use records. This option will pull all published and correctly configured settings to Cloudflare. If I click Continue, it should give me certain values to configure in this case. First, it asks for the plan, but I'd already selected the free one. The first thing it provides is name servers. We need to copy these two values and go to our service. In the main section, we should see name servers. Initially, when you create a new domain, it has basic name servers. These are basic domains for the website to redirect somewhere without content but not broken, right? So in this case, we're not using this, but the custom option. It's what the cloud service gives us. I've added these two. Each platform is different, but once saved, we're assigning the domain management to this service, essentially granting access. Okay, let's go back here. Once everything is ready, we can check it off. This process also takes some time. It's not instantaneous. We need to wait a few minutes, maybe a few hours at most. In my experience, it usually takes about 10 to 20 minutes. Once we have everything set up, we should see this option. Let's go back to the home page. I'm going to select the active one and go to noco.com, which essentially provides me with the DNS records. Here I have all the DNS records and it's already active. This means I can now route all the traffic through here again as usual. Now, all projects and services provide an SSL certificate, so you should be able to access it securely. If after this step, with everything active, accessing the web gives a 301 or 500 error due to infinite redirection, you need to go to scaleTLs, then Overview, and configure scaleTLs in encryption. By default, this should be set to select. It's usually set to flexible, meaning it detects HTTP and makes the same HTTP request, but that'll error if your server is full HTTPS. So in most cases, set it to full to fix the issue. Setting it to full usually solves the problem. If not full, it could be full strict depending on your case. I always recommend configuring this if your server is already HTTPS by default. Once configured, test again and you should be able to run the server. That's the initial Cloudflare setup to access from here. Okay, once Cloudflare is set up with the domain, DNS, and Webflow, meaning we can now access the domain here. If I go to, well, I'm in the account, let's go to account home. I can see my active domain and access the URL. This is a past example. Let's check here. Okay, I can access it, so we're good. If I click on image, I can still see the old page directly linked from Webflow. So what we need to do here is create a new worker. The worker will be our logic executed before client requests reach the server. Any request to this URL will run the code, likely act, then go to the server and return info. So to create a new worker, we need to use the Wrangler package, which Cloudflare offers for free by default. If I can't find the Wrangler docs, I could search for Wrangler Cloudflare in the browser and go there. In fact, it's already here and very easy to find. Wrangler is an NPM package that lets us interact with Cloudflare's CLI to use their cloud service. We click on install and update Wrangler and it asks for certain things. It requires node.js, specifically version 16, 17.0 or later for the JavaScript version. We can install it using npm or yarn. In this case, we'll use npm. I've already created a Wrangler example folder, which you can place anywhere you like. First, we run the npm init command to create a new npm project. We'll leave everything as default, just for testing purposes. Next, we copy this command to install the Wrangler package as a dev dependency. Let's wait for it to load. We can see more documentation here. We can check the version and install the latest if we want to update Wrangler in our project. Alright, it's installed now. To make things easier, we can use the init command. This helps create a new template from scratch without typing everything at once or starting from zero. So let's run Wrangler init. We'll name the project worker test, which is fine. Now we wait for it to load. It's running and loading the necessary templates. It asks which template we want to use first. I want to start with a Hello World example, which is the simplest. I'll use the Hello World worker template, also the simplest option here. For the language, we'll use JavaScript to keep it simple. Now we wait for everything to install. This shouldn't take more than a few minutes, so no worries. If we check the directory, it should have created the src folder. It's already created the index.js file where all the code will run. As you can see here, we're only going to... What it's done is export a default module, exporting only one function called fetch, which is used by default when a request passes through our domain on our cloud platform. It asks if you want to use Git for version control. We say yes, no problem. Do you want to deploy the application? We say no for now. So we have this. Always check the directory to ensure everything is installed correctly. We have the wrangler.toml file. Here you can set environment variables and more. It has its own package.json in the inner folder as Wrangler is installed there. Now, to deploy the project to our platform, I'll go to the worker test folder. And now I just type Wrangler deploy. That's it. It's the most basic way. Here it asks which account to use. I have two set up, but first it'll take us to the browser to log in and get the correct link. Well, I already have it set up, so I'll choose the first one. Now we wait for it to load. It shouldn't take long, just a few seconds depending on the code size. Alright, it's now properly uploaded. To verify this, let's go to the platform. In fact, we're already in... Well, let's go to nocodelic.com. No, sorry, let's go back to workers. Here we have it, workers overview. And here's the newly uploaded worker test. So it uploaded correctly. In the next section, we'll configure this worker to intercept routes and add logic to make this page dynamic. For example, I could input image 1, and it would fetch the correct image. In this case, we get a not found because it's not fetching anything. Now that's done, let's test the worker to ensure it functions correctly. Okay, let's delete this first. We'll set up a route that always triggers this worker. So here, you're in the workers section, right? Next, we go to the specific worker, worker test, and head to settings. In settings, we'll go to the domain and route section and click add. We choose the root part, select the domain, nocodelic.com, and set the path or pattern. I'm telling it to run the worker for any image path on nocodelic.com. Before we run this, oops, I made a mistake here. Let's revert it. Image, okay, just to test. If I go to image here, let's load this properly. Okay, it's showing the Webflow page, so we're good. If I specify here that it'll now fetch an image, or rather execute the worker in the image route, and I configure the worker in a certain way, which I actually have pre-written code for here, let's tell it to return, for example, the path, right? https://www.nocodelic.com, and I wanted to fetch page C404 just for testing. So I do this, okay, let's go here. I do this, deploy. We wait a few seconds, okay, it's deployed. If I go to my image and refresh the cache, it now brings up page C404, meaning my worker is functioning correctly. Even though that image is redirecting to another page, we're already intercepting the request. Alright, now that the worker is properly set up and intercepting requests as we tested, I need to configure it to fetch certain routes or patterns. The info on what it is and using the same template for server-side rendering to have multiple pages with a single template created in Webflow. For that, first we need to go to the worker and configure the pattern. At the start, we only had this image, but we want something like image slash and a name. Image 1, image 2, image 10, image 1000, for example. So we'll change the route. I've already set this up, so let's look at API and route. We've configured this, and now we need to go to the backend. If you don't have a function to fetch the image, you need to create one. In this case, I've already created this in get and match pane test, where it takes the name to search as input and searches a table only by the name in the title field, then returns just the value. The database created a simple table with title, image, and that's it. A simple table with title and image fields, nothing more. Randomly generate these values like this function here. You can choose many things to generate this test data, so all this part is already set up. Now let's move to the important part, which is the squad code. We'll remove this. I already have this code prepared. Let me explain it. First, we have a constant for exceptions when the image isn't found, the URL is incorrect, or for redirects. We have the healthy encounter where we'll get the image, which is exactly what I need to create. If you don't know how to get this, just go to the endpoint and click copy as curl. For example, I'll delete this, I just see it, and that's it. I have the URL in a URL instance because it comes as a string, and I need to pass it to this to directly access the path dynamically. The path in this case would be, if I'm in image from here on, is the path for example, image 1 or more. The result I'd get would be all this. So we have that, and we split it by LA to know what the name is, right? In this case, it'd be this name, and we'd have to go here to the code. And I always, since I know it's the last one, I just use -1 to get the value. Then I decode and use Erlang code, which is basically, so if we get image 1, which is what we need in the URL, it's most likely to come as image %201 or something like that, right? So we need to be careful with that to search for the change, because if I look here, indeed it's a totally different configuration. Once it's decoded, we do if it's all okay. Well, I have some validations. If all's good, we pass the name to the Xano endpoint and return the data. If there's nothing, we also return a 404. And here's another extra step. Once we have the data and consult the original Webflow template, which is http://www.code.lib.com/image. We know this because in Webflow, we have a page called image that responds to that route. Once we have the template, fetching it returns content with an HTML text type header, which we can pass to the HTML writer transform that the worker uses by default. This class is already available to us. We use these two basically to pass and transform values. First, we need to find an image with a principal_image ID, which I confirmed in Webflow for each element, and we resolve its value with the src of dataimage.url. We know these values by checking the endpoint, and we know that in the response we'll get this type of structure. We have data as the parent, then image and URL. So we know which values we need to grab. We can add more validations here if needed. You can access many things before launching it, like changing this or that. Then, once we have this code ready, we need to deploy it. After deployment, we'll wait a few seconds here. It's still a very small package. Okay, it's deployed. Now let's test it. We're going to use Ctrl plus Shift plus R. Indeed, this image doesn't exist. Let's try one that does exist, a white world. We'll pass it through here. And indeed, now it's loading everything from the original template. It's changing correctly. Let's try another one. And it's loading super fast even. So that would be the end of the tutorial. We've covered everything now. Remember, if you have any questions, always check the official docs. ChatGPT can help with tutorials, small queries, or generating basic code. Always review the code afterwards, obviously, for security reasons. Watch out for bad validations or exposed sensitive data. So always be careful with these things. The documentation is very comprehensive. So I invite you to try out these features.